Hey everyone, tonight we're drifting back, very slowly, to a place of heat, sand, and really quite questionable family trees. Yes, that's right, ancient Egypt. You can settle down now. Fluff the pillows. Take a sip of water if you want. And let's let the Nile carry us gently into the land of gods with falcon heads, jackal snouts, and a worrying tendency to marry their sisters. Now, Egyptian mythology is, well, it's not exactly bedtime material if you think about it too hard. There are plenty of beheadings, some creative dismemberments, and the occasional bout of cannibalism. But if we keep the pace slow, keep the tone even, it all turns into something pleasantly surreal. Like watching a very long dream where everyone is wearing gold eyeliner and nobody knows how to stop building pyramids. We'll wander tonight through 4 myths. Nothing rushed, just 4. The beginning of the world, the daily adventures of the sun god, the slightly awkward family drama of Osiris and Isis, and finally, the weighing of the heart, the part where ancient Egyptians decided who deserved an afterlife and who deserved a giant crocodile snack. So, let's drift into the first one. The creation from chaos. In the very beginning, there was, well, not very much. No sky, no earth, no air, no light, just endless, silent water. It was called none. A kind of eternal ocean without fish, without waves, without anything at all. You might think of it as the world's most boring swimming pool. Out of this watery nothing, the first god appeared. His name was Atom. Nobody really knows how he got there. He just sort of emerged. One moment, the next an all-powerful being with no friends and nothing to do. Atom stood alone on the first mound of earth that rose up from the water. And, like many lonely people, he decided the only way forward was to start a family. With himself, yes. He created the air god, Shu, and the moisture goddess, Tefnut. The sources differ slightly on how he managed this. Some say he sneezed them out, which is a charmingly unhygienic idea for the beginning of all life. Others say he spat. Still others imply that the process was more private. Egyptians didn't exactly censor their myths. In any case, Shu and Tefnut became the first divine couple. They produced 2 more, Geb, who was the earth, and Nut, who was the sky. Naturally, Geb and Nut fell in love, because of course they did. And together they gave birth to the major deities, Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. And just like that, the Egyptian world was set. Earth beneath, sky above, air in between, and an ever-expanding family of gods who were about to spend eternity arguing with each other. Humans hadn't even been invented yet, and already there was enough drama to keep several temples in business. Ra and the journey through the night. Now, let's float into the second story, which is about the most important Egyptian god of them all, Ra, the sun god. His job was simple: keep the world running by moving across the sky every day. You'd think he could just relax in the heavens, shining down like a great cosmic lamp. But no, it was a full-time job with night shifts. By day, Ra sailed across the sky in his solar bark, a sort of divine canoe made of gold. All the gods piled in with him like celestial rowers. His bright eye lit the world. Humans got to plant their crops. gossip in the marketplaces, and carve more hieroglyphs about how wonderful Pharaoh was. But when evening came, Ra's work was only halfway done. At night, he descended into the underworld, called the Duat. There, the golden boat transformed into a night ship, gliding through caverns of shadow. And this was not a peaceful cruise. Each night, Ra faced Apophis, a giant serpent of chaos. Apophis wanted to swallow the sun whole, end the journey, and plunge everything back into the darkness of none. Naturally, Ra had to battle him. Every single night. You might imagine that after several thousand years, Apophis would get the message. But apparently, he had excellent persistence. The other gods helped, of course. Cepheus, the god best known for killing his own brother, was surprisingly useful here. He stood at the prow of Ra's boat, ready to stab Apophis in the face with a spear whenever necessary, which, in fairness, was often. If Ra and his crew succeeded, the boat emerged at dawn. The horizon glowed red. The people rejoiced. Another day began. And if you're wondering whether Ra ever lost, no, obviously not. Because if he had, you and I wouldn't be here listening to this. We'd still be floating in an endless sea of nothingness, which is arguably less fun than YouTube.OSIRIS. Isis and the family that couldn't get along. Let's drift now into the third story. Probably the most famous Egyptian myth. A family drama so intense it makes modern reality television look restrained. Osiris was the god of the dead. But he wasn't always. Once, he was king of Egypt. A good king, wise and just. He taught humans how to farm, how to make wine, how to enjoy themselves without immediately collapsing from malnutrition. People loved him, which of course meant someone had to hate him. That someone was his brother, said Set, god of deserts and storms, was not a cheerful figure. And like many embittered relatives in history, he decided the only solution was murder. He built a beautiful chest, essentially a sarcophagus disguised as luxury furniture. At a banquet, he announced that whoever fit perfectly into the chest could have it as a gift. Naturally, Osiris climbed in. And yes, he fit perfectly, because the chest had been built to his exact measurements. At which point, Set slammed the lid shut, sealed it with lead, and tossed his brother into the Nile. Subtlety was not his strong suit. Isis, Osiris's devoted wife, and also his sister, because of course she was searched the land for her husband's body. She found it, mourned, and tried to bring him back to life. Unfortunately, Set wasn't done. He hacked the body into pieces and scattered them across Egypt. Patiently, Isis gathered each part, reassembled them, and wrapped them together, creating the first mummy. Osiris lived again, but only in the underworld. He became Lord of the Dead, ruling there for eternity. Meanwhile, Isis gave birth to Horus, their son, who grew up to battle Set for control of Egypt. The moral, if there is one, seems to be, don't trust your brother with furniture, and possibly invest in better home security. The weighing of the heart. Our last story for tonight is softer. It concerns what happened when ordinary Egyptians died, because immortality wasn't guaranteed. It required a test. When a soul entered the Hall of Truth, it met Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming. Anubis would take the heart of the deceased, place it on one side of a great scale, and balance it against a single feather. This was the feather of Mawat, goddess of truth and order. If the heart was light, unburdened by lies or cruelty, it balanced well. Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe of the gods, recorded the result, and the soul was allowed to move on into the field of reeds, a peaceful afterlife resembling Egypt but without taxes or sandstorms. If the heart was heavy, weighed down by sins, the scale tipped, and waiting nearby was a Mitta, terrifying hybrid. Monster, part lion, part crocodile, part hippopotamus. Ammut devoured the heart in a single gulp. The soul ceased to exist. No afterlife, just nothing. For Egyptians, this was the ultimate motivation. Live a balanced life, keep your heart as light as possible, and perhaps avoid stealing your neighbor's goats, however tempting they looked. And so, with these 4 stories, Egypt's mythic world comes into focus. Creation from chaos, the daily voyage of the sun, the tragic family drama of Osiris, and the quiet judgment of the dead. Strange, beautiful, sometimes a little ridiculous, but endlessly patient, like the Nile itself. As you let these images drift, maybe you can picture the soft glow of torches in a temple, the gentle lap of river water at night, and priests chanting stories in voices slow and deep, the way they must have sounded thousands of years ago. And with that, we can slowly let Egypt fade into the background. The sand settles, the gods retreat to their starry skies, and you, hopefully, drift a little closer to sleep. Welcome back, still drifting down the Nile together. You're probably more comfortable now, maybe tucked in under blankets, or staring at the ceiling, wondering why Egyptian gods always seem to have animal heads. Don't worry about it too much. That's the point of these myths. They don't really make sense, which is exactly why they're perfect for bedtime tonight. In this second stretch of stories, we'll wander through some of the stranger figures in Egyptian mythology. Gods who didn't quite make it onto the A-list. Odd transformations. Divine. Tantrums that sound less like acts of heaven and more like squabbles at a very dysfunctional family dinner. Sobek, the crocodile who got a temple anyway. Let's begin with Sobek. He was a crocodile god. Not a graceful falcon like Horus. Not a stately jackal like Anubis. Just a crocodile. Sharp teeth, bad temper, cold eyes. Now, you might think, who would ever worship something that regularly ate people alive? But Egyptians had a knack for making the dangerous into something sacred. The Nile was full of crocodiles. You couldn't exactly ignore them. So instead, you gave them temples. Sobek was considered powerful, a protector, and also a bit terrifying. In some myths, he helped keep the Nile fertile, which was quite convenient, since the alternative was him eating you. Archaeologists have found mummified crocodiles offered to him as gifts. Some were small hatchlings wrapped delicately in linen. Others were full-sized adults. Imagine devoting hours to wrapping up a 10-foot reptile just so Sobek wouldn't smite your crops. He even had a whole city named after him, which, in fairness, does exactly what it says on the tin. You knew what you were signing up for if you lived there, Hathor. The cow goddess who saved humanity by getting drunk now. Let's move to Hathor. She's often described as a gentle goddess music. Joy, beauty. Sometimes a cow, sometimes a woman with cow ears. And yes, her temples were full of musicians and dancers. Because apparently the divine has a soft spot for tambourines. But Hathor wasn't always calm. In one myth, humanity made Ra so angry that he decided to punish them. He sent Hathor down in the form of Sekhmet, the lioness goddess of war. She roared across Egypt, tearing people apart with claws and teeth. Blood soaked the land. Eventually, Ra regretted this decision. People were being wiped out far too efficiently. He asked Hathor to stop. She refused. Once a goddess gets a taste for slaughter, it's hard to turn it off. So Ra tried something clever. He poured vast amounts of beer onto the fields, mixing it with red dye so it looked like blood. Hathor, still in her furious lion form, saw the red liquid, thought it was more blood, and drank it eagerly. She drank and drank until she passed out. When she woke, she was back to her old, cheerful self, goddess of love and music once again. The world was saved, and the Egyptians took note. If all else fails, get the gods drunk. Thoth, the ibis who solved every problem. Let's drift over now to Thoth. You may not recognize him instantly, but he was everywhere in Egyptian thought. He had the head of an ibis-long curved beak, vaguely scholarly expression, perfect for a god of writing, wisdom, and bureaucracy. Whenever other gods created a mess, and they did so frequently, Thoth was the one who fixed it. He kept the universe running, wrote down the verdicts in the afterlife, and invented hieroglyphs, so humans could scribble complaints on temple walls. One of his strangest tasks was dealing with the sky goddess, Nut. She was pregnant, but Ra had cursed her. She could not give birth on any day of the year, which was a problem, since Egyptian years had 360 days. Thoth came up with a solution. He gambled with the moon, 1 extra light, and used it to create 5 extra days outside of the official calendar. On those days, Nut safely gave birth to Osiris, Isis, Set-Nephthys, and Horus the Elder. Essentially, he hacked time itself. All because Ra got petty about people having too many children. The tale of the heavenly cow. Here's a myth that almost feels like a bedtime story within a bedtime story. It's called the tale of the heavenly cow. It begins, as so many things in Egyptian myth do, with humans being annoying. Ra, the sun god, was old and tired. Humans started plotting against him, mocking him behind his back, as if it was a good idea to gossip about the literal sun. Ra, predictably, decided to wipe them out. He unleashed his either goddess Hathor again, in her destructive mode. She went wild, slaying humans left and right. But then Ra grew lonely. The gods lived in the sky, the humans on earth. Without them, creation would be strangely empty. So, he pulled back to separate himself from humanity. He climbed onto the back of Nut, the sky goddess. who transformed into a giant cow. Ra rode into the heavens on her broad back, creating a permanent distance between gods and humans. The story ends there, with Ra retreating, humanity spared, and Nut the cow stretching across the sky forever. A cosmic boundary formed, born out of irritation and one very large bovine. When gods quarreled with geese, here's a shorter, stranger tale about Geb, the earth god. He was usually depicted as a man lying on the ground, green skin, plants sprouting from his body, romantic, if you enjoy lying flat in fields all day. Geb's sacred animal was the goose. His nickname was the Great Cackler, which is perhaps not the most intimidating divine title. Apparently, his honking gave rise to creation itself. You can imagine the priests trying to make this sound dignified during ceremonies. Behold, the holy honk. It's not exactly Zeus throwing thunderbolts, but Egyptians didn't mind. They found divinity in the strange, the small, and the noisy. Bastet and the fickle nature of cats finally. Let's settle on Bastet. She's the cat goddess. And just like cats today, she had two personalities. On good days, she was Basta gentle, protective, bringing music and warmth to the home. Egyptians adored her, filling temples with statues of sleek cats, burying thousands of mummified felines as offerings. On bad days, she was Sekhmet again, the lioness, raging and destructive, which seems very on brand for cats, really. One moment, they're curled in your lap, purring sweetly. The next, they've knocked over a jar, shredded your scrolls, and demanded to be worshipped for it. For Egyptians, cats embodied mystery, a creature both domesticated and wild, both affectionate and vengeful, perfectly suited to divine contradictions. So, drifting through these tales, we've seen crocodiles turned sacred, cows holding up the sky, gods solving their problems with alcohol, and the occasional goose inspiring creation. Egyptian mythology may be full of grandeur temples, pyramids, endless hieroglyphs, but it's also strangely whimsical. The kind of logic you might find in a half-remembered dream. And as we close this second part, maybe let your thoughts wander like the slow current of the Nile. The temples fade into moonlight, the gods retreat into stars, and all that remains is the gentle sound of desert wind carrying you into softer places. Hey, again, still here, still drifting along this river of mythology with no real need to paddle. You can just let the current carry you further downstream. Maybe your eyes are heavy, or maybe you're still wide awake and wondering how exactly crocodiles got their own city. Either way, we're continuing. Egyptian myths weren't only about creation or the dramatic quarrels of gods. They were also about the spaces in between the underworld, the rituals, the endless journeys that had to be repeated over and over every single day, which, honestly, feels quite relatable. The 12 hours of the night. Let's start with something both grand and repetitive, the Book of Amduat. This was a guide to Ross' nightly trip through the underworld. We touched on this before. Ross sails through darkness, fights a giant snake, emerges at dawn. But the Amduat added details. many details, enough to keep priests employed for centuries. The underworld was divided into 12 hours, each one a cavern or region with its own cast of gods, monsters, and slightly confusing architecture. In the first hours, Ra met friendly gods who offered protection. In the middle hours, things got darker: rivers of fire, walls of serpents, lakes of boiling water. And in the 12th hour, Ra emerged reborn, the sun rising once more. It sounds dramatic, but the Egyptians didn't treat it as thrilling. It was more procedural, like a very slow train timetable. At the 3rd hour, serpents must be appeased. At the 5th hour, Ra merges with Osiris. At the 9th hour, enemies are bound and punished. Tick the boxes, keep the system running, hope for daylight. For Egyptians, the sun wasn't just a glowing ball in the sky. It was a god who needed constant help not to fail. Every sunrise was proof that the divine bureaucracy had worked again. Punishments in the afterlife now. Since we're in the underworld, let's drift into the question of punishment. Because Egyptians didn't really imagine hell the way later religions did. There was no eternal fiery torture. Instead, punishment meant being annihilated, having your soul erased. This was worse, in their eyes, than suffering forever. At least suffering meant you still existed. Being erased meant you were nothing, forgotten, unremembered, which for a culture obsessed with names and monuments was basically the ultimate horror. Still, the Egyptians had an imagination for details. Some texts describe souls being decapitated by giant knives. Others show people upside down in pits of fire. Some unfortunate figures were hacked apart again and again by gods with disturbingly sharp tools. But remember, all of this was written calmly, carved neatly on tomb walls, as if it were just part of a travel guide. Here is the chamber of decapitation. Here is the lake of fire. Please proceed in an orderly fashion. The journey of the Ba and the Kotha. Egyptians thought the soul wasn't one single thing. It had multiple parts. Two of the main ones were the Ka and the Ba dot. The Ka was your life force. It needed food and drink, which is why tombs were packed with bread, beer, and occasionally whole roast geese. The Ka was essentially your spiritual stomach. The Ba, on the other hand, was your personality, often shown as a bird with a human head. After death, the Ba could fly out during the day, visit the living, and then return to the tomb at night. So, if you felt like your grandmother's presence was hovering around your house, well, in Egyptian terms, that was just her Ba popping in for a check, dash up. Together, the Ka and Ba merged into the ACA, kind of transfigured, immortal self. Assuming, of course, that the proper rituals were performed. The heart was light, and nobody messed up the embalming process. No pressure, festivals of the gods while all this was happening in myth. Humans were busy celebrating with festivals. And some of these were not exactly dignified. Take the festival of Hathor at Dendora. People drank heavily in her honor. The idea was to reenact the myth where Hathor got drunk and stopped destroying humanity. In practice, it meant massive public parties, gallons of beer, and priests trying to maintain order while everyone sang, danced, and probably regretted it the next morning. Or the festival of Opet at Thebes, where statues of Ammon, Mut, and Khonsu were carried out of their temples and paraded through the city. It was like a divine road trip. The gods traveled down the Nile on boats, while crowds gathered on the banks to cheer. You can picture it: priests sweating under the weight of statues, musicians playing, and ordinary Egyptians just thrilled that the gods had finally come outside. For a change, these festivals weren't just religious duty, they were entertainment, a break from farming, a chance to see gods up close, even if they were technically just carved statues stuffed inside gilded shrines. The field of reeds back to the afterlife again this time. The nice part: if you passed the weighing of the heart, you didn't just float around on clouds. Egyptians imagined the field of reeds. It looked a lot like Egypt itself, only perfect. The Nile flowed calmly, fields grew crops without fail, houses were comfortable, and everyone could spend eternity farming without back pain or taxes. Which, let's be honest, sounds almost too good to be true. Pharaohs imagined grand palaces there. Ordinary farmers imagined tidy little plots of land. Everyone got their ideal afterlife. But it wasn't automatic. You had to know the right spells, the right passwords, and carry the right amulets. Without them, even in death, bureaucracy could stop you at the door. It's a strangely practical view of paradise. Not feasts forever, not endless luxuries, just a better version of daily life, where things finally went smoothly, when the sky almost fell. Here's another myth to drift through: the time when Nut, the sky goddess, nearly collapsed. In Egyptian art, she's usually shown as a woman stretched across the heavens, her body arched over the earth. Her fingers and toes touch the ground, forming a kind of celestial dome. Beneath her lies Geb, the earth god, usually looking faintly uncomfortable. But at one point, the separation between sky and earth threatened to fail. The two gods leaned too close together. Creation risked collapsing into chaos again. The solution: Shu, the god of air, forced himself between them, holding Nut aloft forever. Imagine spending eternity as a cosmic wedge, not glamorous, but essential. Thanks to Shu, the world didn't fold in on itself. Every breath of air, every breeze, was a reminder of his eternal balancing act. Apophis gets a beating before we leave this part. Let's revisit Apophis, the giant serpent of chaos, because honestly, he deserves a little more attention. Apophis was huge, so vast that he stretched across the horizon. Each night, he tried to ambush Ra's boat, biting, coiling, hissing. And each night, the gods fought him back. Priests in Egypt didn't just sit back and hope. They performed rituals to help. They burned wax effigies of Apophis. They spat on them, hacked them with knives, shouted spells at them. You can imagine the scene: priests stabbing a wax snake repeatedly, chanting very seriously, while everyone else tried not to laugh. It might seem silly, but to Egyptians, this was cosmic warfare. Helping Ra defeat chaos wasn't symbolic, it was real. Every spell, every burned figurine, was part of keeping the sun rising. And given that the sun has indeed risen every day since, Maybe they were onto something. So here, in this third stretch of drifting myths, we've wandered through the long timetable of the underworld, the delicate balance of sky and earth, the eternal paperwork of the soul, and festivals where the gods were essentially bribed with beer. The more you look, the more Egyptian myths resemble daily life, bureaucratic, repetitive, occasionally absurd. And maybe that's why they lasted so long. They made the world feel manageable. Even if you had to fight a giant snake every night. As we let these images fade, picture the Nile once more under starlight. The crocodiles are quiet, for now. The priests are snuffing out their lamps, and Ra's boat sails smoothly, carrying us all a little closer to dawn. Hey, again. We're still floating on this long, drowsy river of Egyptian myths. You don't need to do anything now. Just breathe, relax, and let these odd little tales wash over you. Because if you thought crocodile gods and drunk lionesses were strange, well, we're not done yet. Egyptian mythology is full of transformations, hybrid creatures, and cosmic stories about the stars. In fact, the more obscure you go, the more it feels like a surreal dream that somehow lasted 3,000 years. Gods who refuse to pick one shape first. Let's drift into the subject of shapeshifting. Egyptian gods almost never stayed in one form. They swapped shapes constantly, as if the divine wardrobe was endless and slightly confusing. Isis, for example, was famous for her transformations. She could become a kiter, kind of hawk fluttering over the body of Osiris. She could turn into a swallow, a serpent, or a scorpion if necessary. Always handy when you needed to sneak past enemies or terrify them with unexpected claws. Ra himself once grew old and paranoid, fearing humanity was mocking him. So he decided to withdraw from Earth. But he didn't just walk away. He turned into a weary old man, tottered off, and hid on the back of the sky goddess Nut, as if sulking in the attic. Shapeshifting was less about majesty and more about convenience. Even Set, the chaos god, was described as having a form that nobody quite understood. Sometimes he looked like a donkey, sometimes a jackal, sometimes a creature that modern scholars politely call the Set animal, because frankly, no one knows what it's supposed to be. Pointed snout, squared ears, forked tailets basically. A mythological doodle that stuck. The lesson: Egyptian gods liked variety, and perhaps a little mystery. If you can't be pinned down, you're harder to control. The awkwardness of animal heads. Now, let's linger on those famous animal-headed deities. They look impressive in art. A falcon-headed Horus, a jackal-headed Anubis, a cow-headed Hathor. Very dignified. But imagine this in daily life. How do you speak clearly with a beak? How do you drink wine with a crocodile snout? How do you look menacing when your head honks like a goose? The Egyptians didn't mind. To them, animals carried qualities that humans lacked. Jackals prowled graveyards, perfect for a funerary god. Falcons soared above the desert, perfect for a sky deity. Crocodiles terrified everyone, perfect for a god you didn't want to annoy. And so the temples filled with statues of human bodies topped with animal heads. Each combination a kind of visual shorthand. Power, speed, cunning, danger. It may look odd to us, but to Egyptians it was entirely natural. The divine wasn't supposed to look ordinary. It was supposed to be unsettling. When Horus and Set took it too far, speaking of unsettling, there's one myth about Horus and Set that is, well, Not exactly bedtime friendly, but we'll whisper through it anyway. After Osiris was murdered, Horus and Set fought for the throne of Egypt. Their battles dragged on endlessly. At one point, Set decided to humiliate Horus in a way that was, let's say, deeply inappropriate. Horus, however, turned the trick back on Set, and then presented the evidence to the gods in court. The result? The gods declared Set humiliated and Horus victorious. Egyptians, of course, told this tale without much embarrassment. For them, it was just another example of divine rivalry getting personal. For us, it's a reminder that myths were never as solemn as school textbooks suggest. They could be downright scandalous. Nut and the Milky Way now. Let's look up to the stars. Egyptians didn't just see constellations as animals or heroes. They imagined the entire sky as the body of a goddess Nut. She was arched overhead, painted with stars, swallowing the sun each evening and giving birth to it each morning, which is both majestic and slightly unsettling. Some texts describe the Milky Way as her breast milk, spilling across the heavens. Others imagined it as a great river of stars flowing through her body. Either way, the night sky was alive, warm, maternal. Not cold and distant, but close and nurturing, and every sunrise was her daily rebirth of the sun. Reliable, if a little exhausting for her. Sothis, the star of renewal among the stars. One in particular mattered most, Sirius. The Egyptians called it so this dot each year, just before the Nile flooded. Sirius rose at dawn for the first time after a long absence. This was called the Heliacal Rising, and it was a big deal. The flood was life itself, fertilizing the fields, feeding the people, guaranteeing survival. So Sirius became sacred, linked with the goddess Isis. Temples aligned with its rising. Priests tracked it carefully, and ordinary people probably looked up, saw the bright star returning, and felt both relief and awe. For Egyptians, the cosmos wasn't abstract. It was practical. The heavens told you when to plant your crops. The stars meant bread on your table. Myth and survival were always intertwined. The story of the Eye of Rowan, of the strangest myths, is about the Eye of Ra. You might think it's just a metaphor, a symbol of his power, but no. The Eye was also treated as a goddess in her own right. Sometimes the Eye was Hathor, sometimes Sekhmet, sometimes Bastet. Ra would send his eye down to earth to punish humanity or protect him from enemies. But the eye didn't always come back. In some versions, she wandered off to foreign lands, sulking. Ra then had to send other gods to fetch her, coaxing her home with promises and flattery. It's as if his eyeball had a mind of its own and occasionally went on vacation. The Egyptians didn't mind the inconsistency. For them, the divine was fluid. An eye could also be a lioness. A lioness could become a cat. A cat could become a goddess of joy. The boundaries didn't matter. The power was what counted. Khunnum and the pottery. Wheel now. Let's return to earth, with Khum the ram-headed god. He had one of the more practical jobs in mythology. He sat by the Nile with a potter's wheel, shaping human beings out of clay. Each person he molded by hand. Then he placed them in the womb, where they grew. An endlessly patient craftsman, working day and night, making sure the supply of humans never ran out. It's a charming image. The universe as a potter's workshop. People as vessels carefully thrown on a wheel, each one slightly unique, but all from the same clay. Of course, it also raises questions. Did Khunnum ever get tired? Did he ever accidentally make mistakes, dropping a figure or shaping it lopsided? Perhaps that's how Egyptians explained the little oddities of life. Everyone was a handmade piece, and sometimes the god's hands slipped. When the sun got old finally, let's drift back to Ra again. The sun god wasn't always triumphant. Myths tell of him aging, his bones turning to silver, his flesh to gold, his hair to lapis lazuli. Majestic but fragile. When he grew too weary, he retreated into the heavens, leaving the daily grind of ruling Egypt to pharaohs. In this way, myth explained politics. Kings weren't just men, they were filling in for the sun god, holding the throne while he rested. It's a curious blend of grandeur and exhaustion. Even the mightiest god, blazing across the sky, eventually needed a break. A strangely human detail for a supposedly eternal being. So, in this fourth stretch, we've wandered through shape-shifting deities, impractical animal heads, scandalous divine feuds, and stars that guided both farming and faith. Egyptian mythology never really bothered with consistency. Gods could be cats and lions, birds and serpents, eyes and stars. At once, to us, it may seem chaotic. To them, it was a reminder that the universe was fluid, layered, and full of possibilities. The divine could be many things, because the world was many things. And as we let these images fade, maybe picture the starry body of Nut stretching overhead, the Milky Way glowing softly, while somewhere below come quietly shapes clay figures at his wheel. A cosmic dream, steady and strange, flowing into the night. Hey there again. You're still here, which means you've survived 4 parts of Egyptian myths without running away in search of something livelier. That's dedication. Or maybe you just fell asleep with the video playing. Either way, welcome back. Tonight we're sinking a little deeper into the oddest corners of Egyptian belief. Because if Ra and Isis were the headliners, these next figures were the side characters. The ones you see in the background of temple carvings, looking slightly awkward, but still very important to the story. Base, the cheerful, slightly alarming dwarflets, begin with Base. He wasn't tall or majestic or particularly graceful. In fact, he was a dwarf god with a large face, sticking out tongue, and a habit of glaring directly at you from the front of statues. Most Egyptian gods are shown in profile, because profile looks elegant. Base, however, was always phasing staring, like an ancient photobomb. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, Egyptians loved him. He was the protector of households, especially mothers and children. Midwives would invoke Base during childbirth. His funny, fierce image was carved on bed and painted on mirrors. He might look like he's about to tell a bad joke, but in Egyptian belief, he was the one who chased away demons and bad dreams. Base never got a big temple. He wasn't the kind of god who needed processions or massive pyramids. He lived in the home where people actually needed him. Small, slightly goofy, but endlessly reassuring. Tauret, the hippo goddess who guarded Cradle's Bess, had a partner in domestic protection. Tauret, she looked like a pregnant hippopotamus, standing on 2 legs, with the tail of a crocodile and the paws of a lion. So, not exactly graceful either. But in a way, that was the point. Tauret embodied the raw power of motherhood. Hippos, after all, were dangerous in the Nile, fiercely protective of their young. Egyptians admired that energy, even while being slightly terrified of it. Tauret amulets were worn by pregnant women. Her image was carved on household shrines, and she always looked the same: round belly, big jaw, slightly awkward posture. You wouldn't want to fight her, but you'd definitely want her on your side. So while Ra was busy battling serpents in the underworld, Tauret was quietly making sure your baby survived the night. Heket, the frog-headed goddess of birth. Next comes Heket. She had the head of a frog, which sounds odd, but in Egypt, frogs symbolized fertility. After the Nile flood, frogs multiplied by the thousands, a noisy, hopping promise of life returning. Heket was the goddess of birth. She was imagined squatting beside mothers during labor, breathing life into the newborn child. Midwives carved her image on wands and knives used in rituals, not sharp knives, but magical ones made of ivory, decorated with protective symbols. Even the word Heka, meaning magic, may be connected to her name, because to Egyptians, birth itself was a kind of magic. The moment life appeared where there had been none, and frogs, with their endless eggs and sudden appearances, were the perfect metaphor. So, if you're picturing the Egyptian pantheon as rows of falcons and jackals, here comes Heket, with her wide eyes and froggy grin, gently assisting new life into the world. Dwarves, frogs, and the power of the small notice a theme. The great temples celebrated the sun, the sky, the floods, and kings. But in the home, the gods were small, animal-headed, or simply odd. Base, Tauret, and Heket weren't glamorous, but they mattered. Because glamour didn't keep children safe. Glamour didn't ease childbirth. What you wanted at home was a god who looked slightly ridiculous, but who took demons seriously. It's almost comforting, really. The Egyptians knew that even in a world of pyramids and pharaohs, life came down to ordinary worries. Families, babies, bad dreams. And so their mythology made room for gods who were small, fierce, and funny. Protective magic, wands, and amulets. Linger for a moment on the magic itself. Egyptians didn't just pray for protection. They carried it, wore it, and even chewed it. Amulets were everywhere. Scarabs carved from stone. Eyes of Horus painted on pendants. Small hippos or frogs worn around the neck. The idea was simple. Surround yourself with protective symbols, and the unseen world had less power to harm you. For children, there were special ivory wands, curved sticks engraved with images of protective deities, sometimes base, sometimes lions, sometimes creatures we can't quite identify. These wands were laid on the floor during rituals, like little barriers between the baby and the lurking forces of chaos. It's not hard to imagine the comfort they brought. Even if you weren't sure they worked, you still slept easier knowing that base was carved on your headboard, glaring into the dark. Heke's magical breath. There's one small myth about Heket that feels particularly dreamlike. She was said to breathe life into the nostrils of newborns. It's a quiet, delicate image. A goddess with the face of a frog, bending low, exhaling the first breath into a child's lungs. No thunderbolts, no dramatic battles. Just the slow, steady breath of existence beginning. And this gentle act mattered just as much as Ra defeating Apophis, or Osiris ruling the underworld. In fact, without Hecate, there would be no people for the great gods to rule over in the first place. Temple magic, words that lived beyond the household gods. Egyptian magic extended into temples. Priests believed words themselves carried power. To write a god's name was to call their presence. To inscribe a curse was to bind it. So they wrote carefully, sometimes too carefully. Dangerous names were left incomplete, broken deliberately, so they couldn't cause trouble on their own. Incantations were spoken slowly, with rhythm like songs. Some were whispered over bowls of water, which the sick would then drink. Others were carved into statues, hidden in walls, or buried beneath doorways. The effect must have been powerful, not just physically, but psychologically. If you walked through a temple, surrounded by spells carved in stone, you felt protected, connected, part of a larger rhythm. Shai, the god of Fat among the quieter deities, was Shai, the personification of fate. He wasn't flashy. He didn't have animal heads or dramatic myths, but he decided your destiny at birth. Every person, pharaoh or farmer, had a Shai. Sometimes he was seen as a god, sometimes as a force. Either way, he was unavoidable. Egyptians might pray to him, but deep down they knew fate was not something you could truly bargain with. And so Shai drifted along in the background of belief, as celebrated as Isis or Osiris, but always present. A reminder that, for all the amulets and spells, some things were simply written. Household shrines, where the gods actually lived. If you walked into an ordinary Egyptian home, you probably wouldn't find a giant statue of Horus. You'd find small shrines tucked into corners, clay figures of Tauret, painted wooden images of Base, bowls of offerings, bread, beer, flowers left on simple shelves. The home was its own little temple, and the gods who lived there were the ones who felt closest. Not the ones who steered the sun, but the ones who guarded your door. It's easy to imagine a family at night, lamps flickering, whispering small prayers to Base and Tauret before bed. Because pharaohs may have needed Ra, but ordinary people needed someone to keep the nightmares away. When gods looked like us, another strange little detail. Some deities didn't have animal heads at all. They looked human, just smaller, dwarf children, or simply odd proportions. This wasn't seen as insulting. Quite the opposite. Egyptians believed the unusual body held unusual power. What seemed strange was actually protective. And so deities like Base and the dwarf goddess Patasso Carasiris became symbols of strength. It's a gentle reminder that in Egyptian thought, difference itself was sacred. The divine was not limited to tall, handsome figures. It could be squat, grinning, or downright strange. So here we are, floating with Base, glaring from the foot of the bed, Tauret lumbering protectively nearby, and Hecate breathing life with her froggy face. It's not the glamorous pantheon of kings and sons, but it's the pantheon that kept families safe. Egyptian mythology wasn't just about cosmic battles. It was also about the quiet corners of life, the childbirth, the dreams, the little shrines in ordinary houses. And in many ways, those small, awkward gods mattered the most. So as we drift off tonight, picture those household guardians standing. Watch the dwarf with his grin, the hippo with her heavy jaw, the frog with her gentle breath. They don't look majestic, but they're here, steady and strange, warding off the darkness. Welcome back for the last part of tonight's long wander through Egyptian mythology. At this point, you've probably drifted in and out of sleep already, maybe half listening, maybe half dreaming, which is fine, because these next stories are the kind that already sound like dreams, the kind where nothing quite makes sense, but you just go along with it anyway. Tonight we're slipping further down, into the underworld, into serpent cults, into spells carved on tomb walls, meant to protect souls on their long, anxious journey. The big gods get most of the attention, but the margins of Egyptian belief are filled with strange beings that don't always fit neatly into the family tree. Gods who were more like monsters, spells that read like riddles, and serpents that slither through every shadow. The obsession with serpents let's begin with snakes. Egyptians adored them, and feared them, and worshipped them, and tried constantly to keep them under control. The most famous is Apophis, the great chaos serpent who attacked Ra's solar boat every night. But Apophis wasn't the only one. In tomb paintings, the underworld is crawling with serpents. Some had multiple heads, others breathed fire, some were chopped into pieces and still slithered on. Not all serpents were evil, though. The cobra, goddess Wadjet, was one of Egypt's earliest deities, protector of kings, spitting venom at their enemies. Pharaohs wore her symbol on their crowns, right at the forehead, as if daring anyone to step closer, so snakes could be protectors or destroyers. Symbols of endless life, shedding skin, being reborn, or symbols of chaos, writhing just beyond control. Egyptians never tried to simplify this. They let snakes be both, terrifying and sacred, Mehen. The friendly serpent shield, one serpent, was actually helpful. His name was Mehen, and he wrapped himself around Ra's solar boat, coiling like a living shield. When Apophis attacked, Mehen was there, biting and squeezing, keeping chaos at bay. Imagine it, the sun god sailing through darkness, guarded by a cosmic snake curled protectively around him. At first glance, it looks like a nightmare, but to Egyptians, it was comfort. Even serpents could be harnessed. Even fear could become protection. Underworld beings with questionable designs. If you thought animal-headed gods were strange, the underworld deities take things up a notch. The Amduat, one of the great funerary texts, describes the being's Ra encounters during his nightly journey. Some of them have names like he who lives on snakes. Others are called he who barks or she who dances in blood, which is not exactly soothing. There are headless figures who breathe fire, human bodies with scorpions for heads, giant snakes carrying knives in their coils, and, perhaps my favorite, a group of demons who spend eternity rowing a boat in circles, apparently for no other reason than to look busy. Egyptian artists carved them all carefully into tomb walls, as if to reassure the dead. Don't worry, you'll see this nightmare zoo later. And here's a guide in advance. Ammut, the Eater of the Dead, of course. The most famous underworld creature is Ammut, the Devourer. She sat patiently beside the scales in the Hall of Truth. If your heart weighed heavier than Mat's feather, Ammut ate it, and that was the end of you. She wasn't exactly a goddess, more of a force of nature, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, three of the scariest animals Egyptians knew. Ammut didn't torture, didn't punish. She just erased. A kind of cosmic recycling bin. Oddly enough, this was considered merciful. Eternal torment wasn't the Egyptian way. Oblivion was punishment enough. Serpents guarding the gates. The Egyptian underworld was divided into gates and caverns, each guarded by bizarre beings. And many of those guardians were snakes. You couldn't just walk past them. You had to know their secret names. The Book of the Dead is full of these passwords. Recite the right name, and the serpent lets you pass. Forget it, and well, better hope you packed an extra amulet. This turned the afterlife into something like an escape room. Navigate the puzzles, answer the riddles, and you get to the field of reeds. Fail, and you end up lost in the caverns forever. The Book of the Dead. Not really a book, speaking of spells. Let's pause on the so-called Book of the Dead. It's not actually a single book, more like a collection of customizable chapters. Families would commission scrolls, choosing the spells they wanted for their loved ones. Some spells were basic protection from snakes, knowing the names of gates. Others were oddly specific. One spell let the dead transform into a swallow, so they could fly freely. Another let them become a lotus, symbol of rebirth. Another, for reasons never fully explained, allowed the deceased to transform into a crocodile. Perhaps not the most restful option, but at least nobody would bother you. The idea was flexibility. If you met an obstacle, you could shapeshift your way out. If a guardian asked your name, you had it written down. The afterlife was difficult. Preparation was everything. Coffin texts and pyramid texts before the Book of the Dead. There were the coffin texts, and before those, the pyramid texts. The pyramid texts were the oldest. Carved on the walls of old kingdom pyramids, they were reserved for pharaohs only. Long, repetitive spells to ensure the king rose into the sky and joined the gods. Later, in the Middle Kingdom, the coffin texts spread the privilege to nobles. Painted inside coffins, they guided the deceased through the afterlife. Finally, by the New Kingdom, ordinary people could get their own version, the Book of the Dead, sold by scribes like a divine catalogue. Everyone wanted the deluxe afterlife package if they could afford it. Strange afterlife spells. Some of the spells are oddly practical. Spell 30B, for example, is a plea to the heart itself. Do not stand against me as a witness. Egyptians worried their own hearts might betray them during judgment, so they recited this spell, hoping to keep the organ quiet. Others were defensive. Spells to repel snakes, crocodiles, or insects. Spells to stop a demon from cutting off your head. Apparently a common concern. And then there were the surreal ones. Spells to turn into a bird, a serpent, or even a ball of flame. Because you never knew what the afterlife might throw at you. Better to have every option. Serpent cults in daily life beyond the underworld. Serpents appeared in daily worship. Temples dedicated to Wadjet, the cobra goddess, spread across the delta. Some households kept real snakes as guardians. Others painted cobras on walls or bowls, believing the image alone carried power. Snakes were both pest and protector. You didn't want them in your bed, but you did want their symbol on your amulet. A complicated relationship, much like ours, with electricity, dangerous, but absolutely necessary. The field of Reedsand, of course. After all, the snakes, guardians, and spells. Egyptians imagined a reward at the end. The field of reeds. It wasn't heaven in the Christian sense, more like an idealized version of Egypt itself. Fields stretching forever, canals full of clear water, gentle breezes rustling through crops. The dead would farm there, harvest eternally, and live in peace with their families. It may sound modest, but to Egyptians, this was bliss. Life without hunger, without fear, with endless harvests under a warm sun. Not a palace of gold, not a choir of angels, just Egypt, perfected. Closing reflections. So in this last stretch, we've drifted past serpent cults, awkward underworld guardians, spells to keep your own heart from tattling, and the promise of quiet fields beyond it all. Egyptian mythology wasn't tidy. It was a mix of grandeur and absurdity. Gods who were frogs and dwarves, serpents who attacked and protected, spells that turned you into crocodiles, or birds, or flames. But it was also deeply human. Fear of the dark, fear of snakes, fear of losing loved ones, and the quiet hope that, with enough preparation, you could navigate the shadows and find peace. So as you let your eyes close tonight, imagine drifting on Ra's solar boat, shielded by Maon's coils, while strange guardians watch from the banks. Beyond them, the stars glow softly on Nut's body, and somewhere ahead, the fields are waiting. Eternal, calm, and just a little bit surreal. Good night.